watching the story. We've got a number of vantage points for you, but outside court is SABC News reporter Nhlanhla, who joins us now live for a sense of what's going on there. And we know typically whenever there's these kinds of issues involving the MK party in Nhlanhla, there's a great presence from party supporters outside.
Well, a very good morning to you indeed, Ayanda. In a normal instance, at this particular moment, you'll find MK members outside, showing their support. But I guess one thing that one might put cognizance is that the draw card, which is the president of the party, it is not here. Since our arrival, I can tell you, Ayanda, that we've tried to speak to a couple of police officers here who have told us that, at this particular moment, they don't have any operational plans. And that begs the question, if, former President Jacob Zuma is not going to appear, well, will the members of the MK party come and support these proceedings today? If you remember, if I take you back a little bit, during the campaigns, it would be a totally different scene, whereby you'll find that if MK party is in court, you find about 100 or many people that are supporting MK. But since we interrogated that, we realized that at that particular moment, it also had something to do with because it was an election mood, and obviously MK party taking advantage of that and also using that as a campaign trail, as political pundit also alluded to that. But what I can tell you, Ayanda, currently there's really nothing. We haven't seen any member or any person wearing MK regalia, who's here to come and show support on the court proceedings today. Ayanda?
Yeah, wow. That's certainly not expected, especially when you consider, as I mentioned, what's happened in the past. You say you've engaged some of the police officers who are stationed outside. What are they telling you about what they're bracing for at the very least?
Well, like I already mentioned, that some obviously asked not to be mentioned, and what they said to us, they explained the procedures when, in a court you are expecting a gathering. They say that in most instances, they are given an operational plan in terms of how to deal with that particular gathering. You know that behind me, obviously, you'll find that there would be a small stage where probably if former President Jacob Zuma would be appearing, who would come, leave the court and go and address people, and you'd find that around the gathering, you'll find that there'll be police, monitoring everything. But at this particular moment, they did say to us that since this morning, they haven't received any operational plans. They are not expecting anybody here.
All right, Nhlanhla, thanks very much indeed. Nhlanhla is outside the High Court in Johannesburg. As I mentioned, we're watching the story from a number of vantage points. Let's take you inside the court. That's where we find our Canny Maphanga, who joins us now live. And Canny, as much as there isn't a lot of fireworks outside, I imagine some of the legal arguments inside are likely to paint a very different picture.
All right, well, good morning to you, Ayanda. Indeed, we're about 30 minutes away from the court beginning this urgent application by the MK party. Essentially, Ayanda, what they are seeking is a declarator which will deem that refusal to postpone the JSC sitting next week as unlawful and unconstitutional. In the alternative, they'll be seeking an interdict in order to halt those JSC sittings. You may know that the JSC is supposed to sit next week and interview for a number of crucial judicial vacancies across the country. That includes the Judge President of the Western Cape. Now, we're expecting a number of submissions, some in opposition to this latest bid by the JSC, or not the JSC, rather by the MK, who is arguing that without their MK representative, then the JSC will not be lawfully composed when they sit next week. Of course, the DA was the #1 applicant, which resulted in Dr. Hlophe being interdicted from actually participating in this process. They've raised a number of rationality questions. Remember, this is the first time we're seeing a judge that has been removed going to Parliament as a member of Parliament. after the MK has been voted into that institution and then, of course, being designated to the JSC to serve on that body. But quickly, before we start, I do want to turn to the DA National Spokesperson, Karabo, to elaborate further on the DA's opposition and the critical questions this issue raises, especially in the gaps in legislation to deal with the queries that you're making right now. I think the DA is stating that these JSC interviews can't be halted any longer to wait for the review, or that is part B of the various applications that we're seeing on this issue. What would the difference be in perhaps a few months in seeking that clarity once and for all before you could threaten the legitimacy of the JSC sitting?
Firstly, Canny, hello. Thank you for having me, and hello to your viewers. South Africans depend on a judicial system that works. We have vacancies across the land that need to be filled. Vacancies that deal with bread and butter legal matters for South Africans, dealing with cases of rape, of murder, and everything else that, and as far as crime is concerned, is a discomfort for South Africans. So it is a matter of urgency that those vacancies are filled. And we certainly do not believe that Hlophe is an enough reason to hold those proceedings of the interviews and filling those vacancies. Particularly because if the MK party genuinely wanted to have a representative on the JSE that is as untainted, because they're all shady, but that is as untainted as disgraced former Judge Hlophe, then they could have picked somebody else on their benches, right? So if their best interest was to ensure fair representation of political parties and fair representation for South Africans, which they are supposed to be the vanguard of, then we wouldn't be here today. So a few months down the line is too late for South Africans who depend on a judicial system that doesn't have vacancies, that needs to get going, cracking the ball on solving criminal issues in our land.
Well, we have to be honest here. There are a significant number of voters that did vote for the MK party to represent it in Parliament. And then, of course, the MK does get to represent itself in the JSC. With the absence of the designated individual to go and represent them. Are you not unfairly prejudicing those members of the public that have voted for this specific member of Parliament to go and represent them? And then, of course, there is nothing currently in the legislation, that is Section 47, that barred him from even being a member of Parliament. And then, of course, there's JSC that states that he couldn't be designated to the body. So can you understand that point of view as well?
I genuinely get it, but there are two things. Let me deal with the first one, right? So the people who voted for the MK party are not being disadvantaged by us as the Democratic Alliance in Parliament. They're being disadvantaged by their own representatives who are deciding to protect the political arrogance of their leader in Parliament instead of putting their best interests forward. Like I said, they could have had somebody else go there, but because Hlophe is Lord, as crooked as he is, as dishonest with lacking the necessary integrity to serve in the JSE as he is, they're still choosing to protect him. But that is not an us problem, that's an MK problem. So they should be upset with their own people, right? But like I said, the matter must continue. Two, on there not being any legal precedent that exists constitutionally for him to serve, it is an unprecedented case. Nobody ever imagined that we would be shamefully in a position to, as South Africa, have to sit amongst other nations, considering that we had a whole judge impeached for the first time in South Africa, our land. Nobody thought we would be here. And it is a shame, really, that we find ourselves here as a nation. But we are here and we must deal with it, right? And so part of re-looking at this entire case is looking at reintroducing laws for the first time, potentially, and having Parliament to also play a more responsible role in scrutinizing lists that come from political parties for not only in Parliament and its benches, but also in structures appointed by Parliament. We find ourselves, and that's why it's a Democratic Alliance, we maintain that we will fight tooth and nail to ensure that the people of this, our land, are protected. The people serve on all spheres of all arms of state are people who have the necessary integrity, the necessary judgments, and the necessary care and consideration plus respect for the people of South Africans, because that's what they deserve. And this is what this fight is genuinely about. You're going to have a Judicial Services Commission that's going to appoint other judges that deal with cases of people that are dying in these streets in South Africa, our land. A man that has shown himself to be creative enough to manipulate people for corrupt dealings. Because also you need to remember why we are here. We're not here suddenly because this man was impeached for no reason. We had a corruption arms deal case in South Africa, our land, during Jacob Zuma's presidency. a case that was a precedenting case to show South Africans that we want to tighten the belts on corruption and that we respect the rule of law. And that man chose the side of corruption at the expense of the people, saying it is okay for President Jacob Zuma to be the corrupt man that he is. And that is what we are fighting against. And until we get justice for South Africans who need to ensure that they have trust in the judicial service in our country, we won't rest.
All right, thank you very much. That was DA National Spokesperson Karabo just speaking to us briefly ahead of the 10 a.m. start of this hearing. Of course, as I've stated, Ayanda, this is dealing with Part A, which is really the MK seeking a declarator or an interdict in favor of the relief that they seek to stop or halt the JSC interviews from continuing on Monday. But of course, as you can hear from the various criticisms that we are hearing from the interested parties, that this question goes beyond Dr. John Hlophe and actually speaks to the gaps in legislation, as we are dealing with a first-time instance where you see a judge that has been removed from office then become a member of parliament and have to serve on behalf of the people that have voted them into parliament. And of course, there are these barriers to entry now that have to be resolved in the gaps in legislation. But of course, we'll be giving you those visuals at 10 a.m. live when those proceedings start. Over to you in studio.
And we certainly look forward to it. It's a case that's raised so many interesting questions, and I have no doubt will be cited as we, I suppose, ascertain how to deal with these kind of unprecedented moments. Canny Maphanga, live to us there from the High Court in Johannesburg. For now, thanks very much indeed.